on the War of 1812. Ever heard of it? Yeah, all right, so just off the top of your heads, name some stuff that you know about the War of 1812. Brian. The White House gets destroyed and burned to the ground. Not just the White House, but also the Capitol building. Brian? James Madison was the president. That's a good fact. Anything else? It started in 1812.
I don't know much about it.
Who's it fought between?
America.
America and Great Britain. That's good. Who wins? Does it sound like we won? Will our Capitol and our White House burned to the ground? Doesn't sound very promising, does it? One of the reasons why we don't hear much about it is because it's really not a war that we won. Okay? We didn't outright lose it either. It kind of ends as a draw. Because the things that started the war really don't get resolved as a result of the war, and there's still problems after the war's over. So let's take a look at what some of those problems are that lead to the war and how we deal with it. Okay? All right, so before the War of 1812, Thomas Jefferson was president. And in his first term as president, man, things were good. Everybody loved him. He was super popular. He bought all that Louisiana Purchase territory. He won re-election in 1804. And things were great. Until during his second term, there was some renewed fighting between the British and the French in the New World, in our territory. And Britain decided that the best way that they were going to retaliate against the French was to put a blockade on them. You guys know what a word blockade means? It's one of your vocabulary words. What's a blockade? So let's say Caitlin's grandma is bringing her Chick-fil-A to eat in 6th period. Okay? Well, I don't like that because she didn't bring me Chick-fil-A. And so I'm going to put a blockade on Caitlin. So what am I going to do? What am I doing? I'm going to prevent goods from making it to her. Now, if I'm a country, how might I do that blockade? I'm going to use my military. All right? For the most part, blockades are used using Navy. All right? So if England puts a blockade on France, what does that mean they're going to do? They're going to stop what? They're going to stop trade. Anything that's leaving there, anything that's going in, is going to be messed with. It's going to be interfered upon by the British Navy. Now, what does that mean? Are they just going to be like, excuse me, sir, would you mind to please turn around your ship and go home? You think that's what they're going to do? No. What the British are going to do is they are going to do some things like impressment, which is another vocabulary word. Do you guys know what impressment is? Mm-hmm. Impressment. All right, so let's say that the British find a ship that has American stuff on it, piloted by American sailors, and they stop it. And they say, okay, we're taking all the stuff on your ship, and all you sailors, guess what? You are now part of the British Navy. Come aboard. Well, you're in the middle of the ocean. It's not like, what are your options? Come aboard or start swimming. And it's kind of a long swim. And so they are forcing American citizens to fight in the British military. Can you imagine this today? Like, imagine you're on a cruise, and the British vessel shows up, and like, okay, y'all, everybody on the cruise ship, you guys now, you're going to go fight in the military. And if you don't, you have to jump off. Like, it's kind of hard for us to comprehend that, but that's what they did. And the word for that is called impressment. Impressment. So are we happy about that? We're pretty grieved over that. We're upset over that. All right? Now, you're Thomas Jefferson. You're Thomas Jefferson. You have to react. You have to respond to these grievances. And so What Thomas Jefferson does is he decides to create an embargo to try to keep us out of war. An embargo. And he creates this embargo of 1807. Right? We're trying to prevent war. It's 1807. What's the war that happens? The War of 1812. So we're trying to prevent it. What does the word embargo mean? Embargo means he puts a ban on selling items to foreign countries. No more exports. Well, if we're not shipping anything across the seas, how can they possibly impress our sailors? Because all our sailors are home. So it's going to try to put an end entirely to the impressment of our sailors. Well, that's good and bad. Why is it good? Why? How is the Embargo Act good?
You lose less sailors.
You lose 0 sailors because you're not shipping. How's it bad? Lose money? Yeah. Lose money is an understatement. It pretty much completely tanks our economy because all the shipping and manufacturing, even in the South, they were shipping cotton and agricultural products across the ocean. All that, all of a sudden, is gone. It's dried up. It's gone. And so it puts a lot of people into extreme poverty overnight. Okay, because you go from having a job to not having a job, and not only do you not have a job, all the people in your community don't have jobs. So it puts almost our entire nation into poverty, into destitution. Okay? All right. Now, another source of problems is that's going on between the United States and Great Britain has to do with Native Americans. Native Americans. And William Henry Harrison, this is a gentleman here on the left, he was the governor of the Indiana Territory. And he invited several Native American chiefs to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and basically persuaded them to sign away 3 million acres of tribal land to the United States government. 3 million acres. That's a lot. Okay, that's a lot. Not all of the Indian chiefs were willing to give in. One of these Indian chiefs was the Shawnee chief Tecumseh. And that's a portrait of him there on the right. Tecumseh did not trust Americans. He did not trust that they would honor any agreement. And that any agreements they did make, that the Americans would just straight up break. And he's right. He's right. And so Tecumseh, he wants to protect his homeland against intruding white settlers. So he forms a confederacy with other Indian tribes. And this Tecumseh Confederacy, which is what it becomes known as, they swear off all the things that the white man has brought to their culture. Not allowed to participate in Christianity, speaking their native tribal languages, practicing their tribal religion, wearing traditional buckskin clothing as opposed to manufactured textile goods that are all done by the white man. No speaking English. Swearing off everything that the white person, all this civilization that the white settlers have brought, because he thought it was making the Great Spirit angry with them. And that is why they were losing their land in such great amounts. Well, when the British hear of this, they're like, hey, this is great. Hey, Tecumseh, you need some guns? Go kill some white people? Go kill those terrible Americans. We're British. We're just chilling up here in Canada. We don't want anything to do with your land in Indiana. That has nothing to do with us. But you know what? Here's some guns. Go get those Americans. So the British were arming Native Americans and instigating fights between white settlers in America and the Native Americans inhabiting the regions adjacent to them. So ultimately, what ends up happening is, you have some war hawks that happen, and like, hey, we have all these people here, all these British people instigating fighting between the Native Americans and our sailors. All these British people impressing our sailors and capturing them, taking American citizens and making them fight for them in the British military. And these war hawks called for war against Great Britain. People like John C. Calhoun of South Carolina and Henry Clay of Kentucky, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. They were less concerned with world events and more concerned with American citizens on the frontier. Like, hey, these people are dying. They need some help, and it's the British's fault. So, Thomas Jefferson, after he serves 2 terms, finally steps down, and an election is held in 1808. And another Virginian who belongs to the Democratic Republican Party, James Madison, coasted to victory against a very weak Federalist opponent in Charles Pinckney. And by the end of his first term as president, he's no longer able to keep the United States out of war. James Madison. By the spring of 1812, James Madison had guided our country into war. And he had good reason to. He believed that Britain were trying to strangle American trade and cripple our economy and incite Indian rebellion against us. And he was right on all 3 counts. So he asks for a declaration of war, and he gets it. He gets it. So declaring war is one thing. Like, yeah, I declare war on stuff. Fighting war is something completely different. Our American military is in 1812. Well, it was not what it is today. It was not the superior fighting force, the largest, most well-equipped military in the world. No, not even remotely close. Okay? We were completely unprepared for war. We had just come out of Thomas Jefferson's presidency, where he wanted to lessen the power of the military and lessen the power of the federal government. So if anything, our military was smaller than it was previous to Jefferson's administration. And as a result of this, you see some heavy losses. The British destroy Detroit shortly after war was declared. They take Montreal. The following year, a fleet commanded by American Admiral Oliver Hazard Perry did have some success in fighting a naval battle in the Great Lakes. A lot of naval battles were fought in the Great Lakes during the War of 1812. It'd be neat to go to the Great Lakes and scuba dive and see all the wrecks, because there was tons of naval battles in the Great Lakes. Anybody ever been to the Great Lakes? It's like they look like the ocean. They're enormous. You can't see the other side of them. It's not like Lake Stevens, guys. You don't see the other side of it from the shore. So, different Native American groups, as you can see by the picture, it's just kind of a reenactment. People do as reenactments, but that's a reenactment of the Battle of Thames, where the Shawnee leader Tecumseh is ultimately killed. But a lot of I'm not going to get into directly what like individual battles and things like that. I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights of the War of 1812. Okay, so one of the things that Brian mentioned at the beginning is that the British burned down the White House, not just like catching on fire and then people put it out. They burn it down, right? Some of the things that were rescued from there were rescued by James Madison's wife, Dolly Madison, like portraits of George Washington. She rescued those. And Washington D.C. was no different than any other East Coast town. The British were raiding and burning towns all along the Atlantic seacoast. As they entered Washington D.C., they even said this is for the Battle of Yorktown. Like they're getting revenge for losing the American Revolution. Right? And they torch our stuff. They torch it. Okay. The British burned the Capitol, the White House, and other important buildings. And James Madison and other federal government officials had to flee the Capitol. Can you imagine a foreign country walking through downtown Washington, D.C., setting it on fire, and our government having to leave today? It's hard to imagine, but it happened. It happened during the War of 1812. Now, all the while this is going on, there's fighting going on all over the world. There's fighting in Canada, there's fighting in the Atlantic Ocean, there's fighting in the Gulf of Mexico. And at the same time, all this was going on, a general from Tennessee named Andrew Jackson, he was actually gaining some notoriety and some fame for his ability to win battles. And he becomes a national name, a national celebrity, national hero after a 6-month campaign where he defeats Native Americans at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814. And he really becomes a national hero after the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, where his troops defeated a superior British force at the Battle of New Orleans. Hundreds of British troops die, while he loses just a handful of troops. Andrew Jackson, very good military leader. So, Andrew Jackson becomes nationally renowned for his ability to lead men into battle and for his propensity for killing Native Americans. He himself personally does it and enjoys it. He is a killer of Native Americans. All right. Ironically, the greatest battle of the War of 1812 was the Battle of New Orleans, and it takes place after the war's over, technically. The Battle of New Orleans was January of 1815, but the war ends on Christmas Eve, 1814. I guess they didn't have text messages back then, and he didn't get the DM, but the war was over. New Orleans is pretty far away from, what's that word? The Treaty of?
Oh, shit.
We say Gent because we're hillbilly southern West Virginians. But this place is actually in Belgium, and it's Ghent. Ghent. Our Gent is named after that Belgium, but it's actually pronounced Ghent. So, sorry. I say Gent too. I'm like, hey, I'm going through the Gent toll booth, So, it's actually Treaty of Ghent. So just when you leave here and you're in a place with people not from southern West Virginia, please don't say Gent or Gent when you're talking about the Treaty of Ghent. Okay? I don't know why the Treaty of Ghent would come up in conversation, but if it does, it's Ghent. Okay? It is signed on Christmas Eve of 1814, while the Battle of New Orleans was fought January 8th, 1815, after the war was technically over. Now, this treaty is not necessarily an agreement. Nothing really changes. It's really what the Treaty of Ghent is an armistice. What does the word armistice mean? You guys are brothers and sisters, and you fight and hit each other, or you punch each other in the back of the car,
Yeah.
and then you're truce. And you say truce, what does that mean? You're just going to stop hitting each other. That's what an armistice is. They're just going to stop fighting. Now, the reason why your brother or sister hit you could be because, you were humming. You're not going to stop humming. Then they might punch you again in the future. But at that moment, you're just going to say, we're going to stop punching each other right now. I'm going to still keep humming, and you're going to still keep kicking my seat. But we're going to stop punching each other. That's basically what the Treaty of Ghent is. They just stopped fighting, but all the stuff that they were fighting about, they don't solve. They leave it to future generations of Americans and British to solve it. So the Treaty of Ghent signed on Christmas Eve of 1814, declares an armistice or end of fighting. And it does not really address the issue of impressment. Hey, British, are you going to keep taking our sailors and making them fight in the military? Yeah, maybe. Well, okay, we'll stop fighting. Americans were just eager for peace. As you might imagine, trying to rebuild our capital after it had been burned to the ground. Okay? So Americans were eager for peace. And eventually we come up with some ways in which we settle the argument that started these grievances that we have with the British that start the war. Okay? But, let's take a look at some of the results, though. Like, what happens as a result? England and France, the two most powerful empires in the world, gain our respect. They're like, okay, America, you didn't really win, but you also didn't really lose. And it wasn't like you were fighting, some third world country. You were fighting one of the most powerful empires on planet Earth. And you held your own. So you kind of get some street cred. And that's what we got. We got some street cred with Britain and France. We gained respect, showing that we were able to hold our own. Because you got to think, guys, we're a young nation. We're like very young. Brother, we're just getting knocked out. Hey, what's up?
Is this yours?
No, ma'am. It could be Mr. Clay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, so it shows that we get some street cred. It shows that we are able to hold our own. We've gained some national pride. You see an increase in nationalism. Previous to the War of 1812, if you are, if you lived right here where you live today, and you went to, you traveled abroad, went to England or France, and somebody said, "Where are you from?" You'd say, "I'm from Virginia." You would show pride to your state as opposed to your nation. Now, if you travel to another country and somebody asks you where you're from, you're like, "I'm American. I'm from America." You show your you have national pride. Before that, there was no national pride. People had sectional or regional pride. They showed their allegiance to their state. So you see an increase in nationalism. You see an increase in manufacturing. All right. A lot of this also has to do with that embargo that Thomas Jefferson created. The embargo goes both ways. We're not shipping anything to them. They're not shipping anything to us. We still need stuff. We still need stuff.
Yes.
Yes. So how are we going to get it?
Make it.
We're going to make it ourselves. So you see an increase in manufacturing as a result of the embargo and this just the very simple fact that we were fighting with the greatest manufacturers on the world. We're not going to trade with them. You're not going to be friendly and have trade with people that you're trying to kill. So you're on your own. So you're going to see an increase in manufacturing. You also see a decrease in Indian resistance in the eastern part of the United States. One reason is because, well, a lot of them are killed as a result of the War of 1812, the fighting that happens. And also, they're pushed to the west. They're being continually pushed out, being pushed westward. So that's pretty much a very short Cliff's Notes version of the War of 1812. Once again, though, causes. What is one of the causes? What caused it? I want to know causes. What caused it? British impressment of American sailors. What else?
They burnt the White House.
Well, it happened during the war, but what caused them to go to war in the first place? Brian. Okay, the embargo. Sure, the embargo definitely led us to have some international conflict over commerce. Absolutely 100% correct. British providing military aid to Native Americans on a northwest frontier. Okay? So those are our grievances that led to the War of 1812. And these are the things that happened as a result of it. Okay? If you're going to know anything about the War of 1812, that's what you need to know, the causes and the results. All right? So do you guys have questions about the War of 1812? If anybody at home has questions, feel free to contact me over Schoology as they come.